go. Great. Um, so without further ado, I would love to, I'm very excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Allison Black. Some of you around Nantucket may recognize Allison from her gull work when she was studying out on Tuckernuck and Nantucket too, right? On mainland Nantucket? Yep. But tonight she's going to be talking about life on the high seas as a NOAA Seabird and Marine Mammal Observer. So with that, I would love to introduce Allison, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm super excited to be here tonight. I'll show a little bit about my background, but as she said, I have spent some time on Nantucket and the surrounding areas, and it has certainly contributed to where I am today. So I have a little appreciation. So thank you both for having me back out to talk about what I currently do. I hope you all will learn something new for my presentation tonight. And given that this is a nature organization, I know that plenty of folks watching tonight have a strong appreciation for our natural world, but I hope you'll have maybe even more appreciation for some of the fun things that the ocean has. For tonight, this presentation will be broken up into 3 uneven sections. I'm going to start with introducing myself, my job, some related careers, and what life is like on the NOAA ships that I work on. And then for the bulk of my slides, I will be showing pictures of all the wildlife that I've seen. Lots of pictures of birds, as birding and seabirds are my primary responsibility, though I do a fair amount of marine mammal recording as well. And then I'll wrap it up with a smaller section on some of the projects that I've worked on, so you can see where this data goes and some of the fun things I've been able to be a part of. And also, if you have ever been interested or have been on and maybe had a tough time being seasick or anything like that on pelagic trips for whale watching, or likewise, some tips and tricks sort of for the end of that. I go by many names while I'm out at sea. Bird Girl is the one that I get the most, but my official job title is actually Seabird/Marine Mammal Observer. In essence, I support science that's conducted by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, National Marine Fisheries Service. Lots of acronyms there. NOAA NIMFS is the short one. So I'm not a federal employee. I am an independent contractor and have contracted for NOAA through various contracting agencies depending on what the cruise is, and I've worked for both Northeast Fisheries and Southeast Fisheries. Outside of that, I'm from Connecticut originally, and I have moved back here with my husband, Ryan, who is also in the marine world. You can probably guess how we met. He is usually driving the ships that I get to sometimes be on, and I'm doing the work outside on the ship. So it's nice to be with someone who appreciates and understands how life can be kind of chaotic when you're out at sea for weeks at a time. As I said, birds are sort of my primary purpose because they're certainly my passion. I spend a lot of time with the Connecticut Ornithological Association. I'm currently the secretary of the organization, and I also chair our workshops and mini grants committees. I also have founded and continue to compile the Norwich Christmas Bird Count, though Nantucket still holds a very strong place in my heart. And recently I started volunteering with Mystic Aquarium on their first responder program for animal strandings for whales and seals and other animals that strand in the area. I got into birds through an ornithology class that I took while I was an undergrad. And we took a spring break trip to the Everglades, which I really can't think of a place that's better to get into birds than South Florida in March. There's just amazing migrants to be had all over the place. And that was really the catalyst that sort of turned this nature nerd into a full-blown bird nerd. But one of my jobs over the last 10 years since I've gotten into birds was working on Tuckernuck Island as the island's seasonal coastal steward. So I did that in 2014, 15, and 17. Fun fact, actually, that picture of me shown here carrying that scope on a beach was actually taken in 2018 on Esther's Island. Some things about what life is like as an observer. As I said, I'm usually at sea anywhere between 14 and 28 days. I actually just got back this morning from one where we spent 22 days looking for seabirds and marine mammals on the East Coast, mostly south of the islands, all the way to Cape Hatteras. This one is specifically looking for marine mammal abundance and distribution. And I was doing birds specifically for this cruise. Well, we had a whole separate team of marine mammal observers. I like to take a lot of pictures while I'm at sea. You'll see a lot of them in this presentation. If they are not labeled otherwise, they're by me. But I do have some from other friends who are slightly better photographers than I am. Most of my photography is more for fun rather than professional identification. And I wanted to share a little bit about the pros and cons of what life is like at sea. Obviously, the wildlife. I've gotten to see some amazing animals that a lot of people will never get a chance to see unless you're really offshore or in certain conditions. And I know that I'm lucky to have that sort of perspective. And it's also fun. I get to work with some of the coolest people working on the coolest projects. And again, I'll show some of those projects at the end, but it's really great to work in an environment where a lot of people share the same mindset as you, or are contributing to really interesting science and they are excited about the projects that they're working on. So that excitement is contagious and it can make for a really fun work environment. There are some cons to working at sea for long periods of time. Once the boat leaves, we have left. We don't go back unless you are actively dying or the boat is undergoing some issues, which has happened before. Boats do break. The days can be a little long. We do 12-hour shifts while we're out at sea, but they definitely pass when you get to see exciting animals. There is some fun things about trips in terms of noise and movement, which I'll cover a little bit more, but they can mostly be cons, though sometimes it is fun to ride some of the fun rollers that you'll get way offshore. Speaking of those, let's talk about some related careers in terms of my job. This is how a lot of people get into doing marine mammal observing. Protected species observers are also usually independent contractors or done through an organization who is contracting for a greater entity like NOAA. Very similar to my role, but for protected species observers, this line of work is usually related to mitigation. These positions are almost exclusively focused on marine mammals and sea turtles because they are federally endangered or protected species. And the mitigation is done usually in terms of energy. So either working on offshore vessels that are working in the oil and gas industry or the wind industry across the globe. They're protected species observers in so many different fields. And it's something that is very accessible in terms of getting experience offshore. I listed some of the requirements there for anyone who's interested in this sort of work. You do need to usually have a bachelor's degree or relevant or equivalent experience. You have to do a protected species certificate, and there are a number of organizations that offer those programs. I did mine through a company called RPS. The Boziet and Hewitt certifications, as you'll see throughout this presentation, there are a lot of acronyms. Boziet and Hewitt refer to what they call ditch training. It's basically helicopter evacuation training, because for a lot of PSOs that are working on offshore rigs or vessels, helicopters are the main form of transportation. And you have to do training where you escape underwater from a simulator in order to be certified as a PSO, which can be a limiting factor for some folks. But once you get that, it's good for 5 years. So it's not something you have to do all the time. You do have to do medical exams, obviously. If you're offshore working, you need to be in decent health or able to be in decent health. And then there's usually, if you're working in U.S. waters, you'll need a nearshore or offshore approval by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And that just means that you have these certifications and can work for NOAA or BOEM in those mitigation roles. Another similar position that works on ships, specifically with NOAA ships, though other large research vessels, some that are, say, in the Scripps network or for other universities, are survey technicians. These folks are a little bit more of the technical science. I've put some pictures here of my friend Katie McGinnis. She's the chief survey tech of the Henry Bigelow, which is a ship, one of NOAA's fisheries research vessels that's home ported in Newport, Rhode Island. She's been doing this job for about 10 years. The Bigelow does a lot of fisheries research, and she does a lot with that. So they do a fair amount of oceanographic research as well. They do a lot of instrument maintenance and recording, and they sail quite a bit alongside all the different projects that take place on these vessels, helping with the science and sort of facilitating between the crew and the science party that's on there. So I put a little bit about what kind of experience you need. These survey technician positions are federal positions, so you are a federal employee. So that comes with some of the perks in that sense. But it does require a four-year degree and usually a little bit more of technical experience if possible, or some sort of equivalent experience. The NOAA Corps is the other equal, I would say, education experience that are on the vessels that I work on. For those that are not familiar, the NOAA Corps is a uniformed commissioned officer corps. So it is equivalent to any of the commissioned officer branches of the military. It's the 8th uniform service with the addition of the Space Force several years ago. So just like the U.S. Public Health Service, the NOAA Corps is an officer-only commission. They do the same rankings and follow the same uniforms as the Coast Guard, and they actually do their BOTC class, their basic officer training class, alongside the Coast Guard officers at the Coast Guard in New London, Connecticut. So these folks are the ones that drive the research vessels. NOAA also maintains a fleet of aircraft, and they are the ones that fly those planes that we use for research. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I haven't had a chance to do surveys yet in terms of air observing, but because that is a whole nother set of qualifications as well. But that is something that the NOAA Corps officers can do. And because, again, it's a commissioned service, you can do 20 years after you're for your obligation and do full retirement. A couple things about the NOAA Corps. The requirements are a little bit different for the NOAA Corps because they have to have a little bit more STEM related credits, and there is a little bit more about the physical aspect of it because you do have to do the basic officer training course, BOTC, which is the physical boot camp style thing that people go through when they do OCS. And as with any federal employment, you have to pass a fair number of background checks and do some interviews. Let's see here. Yeah, so I want to cover a little bit about NOAA itself. NOAA is obviously a large organization, and my part of it is only a small one. Most folks have probably heard about NOAA through fisheries related stuff or the National Weather Service, particularly the National Hurricane Center, which is a division of NOAA. The NOAA ships that I sail on are under OMAO, which is the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. So there are a number of research vessels and planes that fall underneath that. There's 4 ships here that I regularly sail on that you can see. There's the Ronald H. Brown, the Henry Bigelow, the Pisces, and the Gordon Gunter. The Pisces is the one that I just got off of this morning, and actually we'll be headed back out on Monday for another 22-day leg. Then you have 10 aircraft, which I didn't picture here. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to do any aerial surveys yet, but they have 15 different ships of different classes, and then they actually have 4 ships that are being built for future use. Some of the NOAA ships are built specifically by NOAA for NOAA, and then some of them are repurposed Navy vessels. So the Gordon Gunter, which is shown down here, that was formerly called the U.S. Navy ship Relentless, which was a submarine hunter that was used by the Navy in the Cold War and was repurposed as a fisheries vessel. She is home ported in Pascagoula, Mississippi, which is also where the Pisces is home ported. So there is a couple spread out on different coasts, docks for NOAA that I've gotten to travel to, which has been a fun part of it. But in essence, NOAA has ships, these large research vessels across both coasts and also out in Hawaii. A little bit about what life is like on the ship, and behind me is pictured is the Gunter again. Here's a quick little time lapse of myself on the flying bridge of one of the ships, I believe this is on the Bigelow. I often sail out of the Newport dock, which is home ported in the Newport Naval Station. And we sail underneath the Pell Bridge every time we have to sail out. I recently ran a charity 4-mile run over the bridge, which was pretty exciting. And then a couple days later, we sailed underneath the bridge on the way out. So I have really seen this bridge from just about every angle. So it's just a hyperlapse of what life is like as we sort of sail underneath. I apologize, it's a little bit grainy, but it's a nice view from underneath as well. And let's see. Before we get too comfortable aboard, though, we have to do drills. They are Coast Guard required. We have to do them within 24 hours of leaving the dock. This is just sort of an overview of what these drill boards look like. I have to do fire and emergency drills. And as a scientist, thankfully, I don't have to actively fight fires for the most part. So most of the time, our job as scientists is to get out of the way of the ship's crew as they practice fire drills in different simulations. So we do those once a week. And then we also do abandoned ship drills where we will don our immersion suits and muster in our stations for the different life rafts. And we also do man overboard drills for that situation. Like I said, most of the time as a scientist, my job is to get out of the way, but occasionally we do get to participate in some of the drills. During the abandoned ship drill, we have to don said immersion suits, which you see here. We're supposed to have to do it in less than 2 minutes. I can do it pretty quickly. I've gotten pretty good at it. We also get to do drills, as you can see here. My friend Kelsey is doing sort of an extra drill where we got to practice doing a smoke or loss of power drill where it simulated that the ship's gone dark and you need to get out of your stateroom blindfolded. So some extra little drills along the way that we get to have some fun with to make it a little more realistic. However, we have not had to do any of these in real life yet, thankfully. I wanted to show a little bit about what the crew board kind of looks like. So there's a lot of different positions on the ship. As I mentioned, you can see here we have the command, which is the officers on the ship. They're the ones, again, that drive the ship, NOAA Corps officers. And then you also have the engineering department, which is a variety of different marine engineers in the chief, first, second, and third positions, as well as junior engineers. They keep the ship running. They keep the ship turned on and running. The deck crew are mostly folks that are assisting with the science in terms of deployment of gear, whether we're doing bongo nets for plankton or we're towing a hydrophone to listen for marine mammals. They're the ones that kind of keep everything related to the deck moving. The stewards are also very important for us because they're the ones that feed us and take care of all things like the linens and the rooms and all those sort of things that make the ships as comfortable as they are. The electronic technician is also a very important position because they are the ones that keep the Wi-Fi running on the ship. So it's quite a morale boosting when we can have decent Wi-Fi while we're out there because it is sort of a long period of time and it's good that we're able to keep in touch with family. Here's a quick little plan of the day. This is just one of the ones from a ship that I had sailed on a couple of years ago. There's always a meme of the day. It's quite fun for a lot of people to be able to do the meme of the day. And then it's usually related to something that's going on the ship. This one was one where everybody else had apparently been seeing lots of cool animals out there, and I kept missing them. So I made the meme. I was the meme of the day for this particular one. But it just sort of gives a schedule about what we're doing at approximate time because we usually do 24-hour operations while we're out there, and then just sort of see conditions for the day. Let's see. Here's a sort of a standard personnel room aboard one of the FSVs, which is basically identical to the one I got off this morning. There's usually 2 people to a room, and there are some rooms that can fit 3 or 4 people, but there's only usually 1 or 2 of those rooms. On the FSVs, the fisheries research vessels, they are a little more bougie than some of the other older Navy ships. So each room has their own climate control, and we get our own head and sink and shower. But you also have these nice little privacy curtains that you can stake out your little spot with, which is nice because everybody has a roommate. And you can see some of, the finest engineering here of keeping items secure while we're underway. I've had some of my best nights of sleep while I've been on the ships when it's dark and cold and there's a gentle rock and some of the white noise that comes with just being on a vessel. And I've also had some of my worst nights of sleep. When the ship is violently tossing, you're getting heaved around in your bunk, things are falling down, alarms are going off. It can be really hot or cold, depending on what climate you're in as well. So there's a little bit of back and forth there, but there's usually also a small gym on the boat, which is nice. I don't recommend running on the treadmills when you're in rough weather. That can be a little difficult, if not dangerous, but it is nice to have sort of a space for that when we're out for long periods of time. This is a view of one of the other ships. This is the Gunter, which is that repurposed Navy ship. It was transferred to NOAA and outfitted in the early 90s. Thankfully, the carpets have been replaced since then because it can be a little dirty out there. But you can see sort of these rooms are a little bit bigger. They're shared heads here, and then this is actually a fold-away bunk that comes down that you can have if you have a roommate, but these ones you tend to have less because they have a little bit more berthing to them. So just a different room setup, but another example of what life is like out there. Again, a big shout out for the steward departments that keep us fed. People do ask me a fair amount what I eat while we're out there. Every boat kind of has a different preference depending on like where the boat is home ported. For example, the New England boats do get quite a bit of seafood. There is slightly less of that in the Gulf. It's interesting, like I said, the different perspectives that the different chief stewards have and how they like to do their food, but we definitely eat well. And this was actually taken, the center photo. You can actually see that same Pell Bridge that was shown that we went underneath earlier. We had to come into port right around 4th of July weekend because the weather was really bad, and we had to anchor out in Newport, in the Newport Harbor, and we had our 4th of July barbecue cookout with a view of the Pell Bridge. I want to talk a little bit more about weather just because it's something that can really affect morale on the ship. You can be in such bad weather that we can't do any operations or we have to go hide somewhere. Like I said, we pulled into the Newport Harbor. There's a lot of variations there. Some of you might recognize this view. This is coming through the Cape Cod Canal with that train bridge in view here. This is looking through the back of the boat. Nice sunset, nice calm seas. Again, really nice sunsets and sunrises out while we're out there. Some of the best views I've gotten for sure. Nice flat seas off of Florida in this photo. And then some days you get this view where you can't see past the ship's bow. Usually in these conditions, the foghorn is going off on the ship and it's going off every 2 minutes, which when you're on the flying bridge is not subtle since it's right there. So generally speaking, we have to move down to the bridge for those operations. Usually for my personal observing job, we can't work when visibility is less than 300 meters or a Beaufort 8 or higher. For those familiar with the Beaufort scale, usually that's 34 to 40 knots, which is 39 to 45 miles an hour for wind, so it's quite windy, and waves somewhere between 13 and 20 feet on the Beaufort scale. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why that might be, but it's mostly because you're dealing with waves that are moving the boat so much it's difficult to hold your binoculars. This is a view of what some of that scale might look like. This is right about the edge of our operations. As you can see, there's a lot of whitecaps, and I pictured myself with what I might be wearing during such a time as that. Windburn is definitely real. Not so much sun, but definitely wind. In this particular situation, we actually ended up having to run in and hide in one of the sort of alcoves around the Gulf of Maine because it was just too wild for us out there. Another video, hopefully no one gets too seasick too easily because I wanted to show what some of the conditions were like. This is aboard the Ron Brown, which is that big NOAA flagship that's 270 something feet. And as you can see, if we're moving this much, a smaller vessel would probably not fare well. A couple other short, quick little clips. I just like showing these perspectives. This is a slow motion from the flying bridge of the Gunter. So I'm about 40 feet up and we hit a wave just about right. And then this one I took just a week ago when we were out off of Hatteras. We had some pretty incredible sea smoke because the air temperatures were really cold with that front that came through recently. And because we were in the Gulf Stream, the water was really warm, and with the cold temperatures, it made a lot of sea smoke. So you can sort of see some of that. And because the weather was so rough, the wind was blowing, that sea smoke was just getting blown right across the ocean. It's really cool. Little scary, but really cool. I was inside for both of those. All right, so let's get into some of the fun stuff. The wildlife. So there are, again, the next few slides will encompass some of the fun snapshots that I've taken along the way. I'll cover birds first, which are obviously a little bit more of my preference, but I will talk about the marine mammals. So this is my list. I like to keep the list. A lot of birders do. These are all the species I have seen from a boat. It's not quite in perfect taxonomic order, but you can kind of get an idea of the different groups that I've seen. There are a fair amount of songbirds because when I'm sailing in spring or fall, we actually get a fair number of migrant songbirds that will land on the ships. Unfortunately, not all of them make it, but some of them do better than others, and I do try to bring out some freshwater and suet or birdseed with me on those migration-timed cruises because we will get some that will hang out, and I'll give an example of that later. But as you can see, this really covers the gamut all the way from ducks and geese and true seabirds into random species, some warblers, and then ending with a bunch of different sparrows. And I'll go through what a couple of those are, but let's start with seabirds first. This is a red-footed booby that landed on one of the ships I was on. It was actually my lifer red-footed booby. I was on a survey off of South Florida in 2022, and it actually spent the night on the ship with us. So these are probably the three most common species that I see while I'm surveying in New England waters. I won't go into ID with all of them. I did label these. And if you're taking the ferry over to Nantucket anytime in the spring and summer, you can probably get an eye on at least one of these birds. Some different other species of shearwaters. Audubon's was actually just split into two different. So our local ones are now being called Sargasso shearwaters, but they are more common for us in the summertime, whereas Manx are more common for us in the wintertime, and fulmars as well, since both Manx and fulmars are more of a northern nesting seabird. We see almost exclusively light morph northern fulmars, but we can also sometimes see dark morphs, which they look like just little chocolate versions of the light morph. And it's always fun when you get to pick one of those out of a group. Some of the storm petrels and true petrels that we see, I have seen a fair number of black-cap petrels and trindade petrels. Unfortunately, I have not seen any Bermuda petrels from a NOAA boat, but other folks have been lucky and been able to see some. We have seen a fair amount of white-faced storm petrels, especially recently, which is an other side of the pond on the Atlantic Ocean side bird. But in the late spring and summer, they'll occasionally come into some of the warmer deep water areas off the edge of the shelf, which is pretty exciting because if you've ever seen a white-faced storm petrel or a video of one, they bounce like little kangaroos on the water. And they're so much fun to watch, just kind of boinging along. Highly recommend YouTubing a video of them. So it's always a little treat to see them. But we mostly see Wilson storm petrels, which are a southern hemisphere nesting species and spend their Antarctic winters up here with us. And leeches and bandrumped also kind of coincide with them. So ID with them can be a little difficult, but we see enough of them that with time it can be an easier ID. We do see a lot of Jaegers. Some folks might be familiar with parasitic Jaegers, which love to antagonize our poor tern colonies in the late summer. And we see a lot of them out at sea. It's fun to see an interaction like this photo here, where we don't see long-tailed Jaegers very much, but we had a parasitic Jaeger that was actually parasitizing this long-tailed Jaeger for its little snack here, which is not a common occurrence, but that was fun that we were able to get it. Jaegers, if anyone's familiar with them, they can be tough to ID. They come in all sorts of ages and color morphs, and you can even see that these 3 Pomeranian Jaegers are different aged and in different plumage stages and different color morphs. So it makes, again, for a tricky ID sometimes, but it's definitely made me a better birder as I've gone along. Skuas are sort of the big bullies of the sea. We have 2 different species that we see. We mostly see South Polar skuas because they come during their Antarctic, as the name implies. They are an Antarctic nesting species. And we see them during our summers, and then we'll see great skuas if we're doing winter surveys. We haven't seen any just yet, but I'm hoping to see some. And I wanted to talk about one particular bird, A419. This is the South Polar skua that I saw in August of last year. Myself and my fellow birding observer, Liam Waters, and I saw this bird on a day that we had a lot of South Polar skuas on George's Bank, which is kind of at the center of the Gulf of Maine, out on the edge of the shelf. And thankfully, we just happened to be really lucky that day, and this bird flew in front of the boat, and we noticed that it had a band on it. And you can actually, because it's a field readable band, which if you've ever seen an oyster catcher on the beach of Nantucket, you know that those field readables can be tough to read, but if you can get a picture of it, it definitely helps. So we snapped this photo and tried to figure out where it came from. And after some top-notch networking by my friend Kate Sutherland, we learned that this bird was banded on Barton Peninsula, King George Island, Antarctica, in January of 2018 by the Korea Polar Research Institute. This bird and its mate were both banded at the same time there. And given that it takes about 6 years for these birds to reach maturity, this bird has to be at least 12 years old because it was banded as an adult. It was actually seen in the colony about 6 months prior with its mate that was still banded. They were still together. Unfortunately, they weren't successful nesting, but it should actually be back in the colony about this time. So I hope it's down there. I hope it made it back and that it has a little better luck with its breeding season. But it's just such a cool example of what color banded birds can do. One single band can tell you so much information about these birds. Okay, so let's see. Some of the more fun birds here are tropic birds and our frigate birds. They are not something that I get to see a lot in the northeastern surveys. These are birds that are very far out to sea, very pelagic, and frigate birds will travel in a group, but generally speaking, the tropic birds are solo flyers. And so when we catch them flying by the boat, they're usually flying by themselves. They're flying high, quick, and you get like a 2-second look at them. So happy to get these photos of them. While they're not super great, they are at least ID photos, and that's something that is not always something you get. This frigate bird here is a young one, and they are often parasitizing other birds. So if we have like a big flock of terns, say in the Gulf of Mexico, you can always be sure that there's a magnificent frigate bird kind of looming in the distance. One of the more photogenic species that we encounter at sea are brown boobies. They're undergoing an explosive population expansion all the way up into the Northeast. So I have actually seen a brown booby in Canadian waters before. Normally, they're much more south breeding, like around Mexico and those areas. They like to hang out on the ships with us or ride alongside the ship. You'll see them, actually you can kind of see it in this photo here. They love flying fish, and as we're sailing along, flying fish will be flushed by the ship and they'll dive in after them, which is kind of fun to watch here. They also take a couple years to reach full adult plumage, so you can kind of see the different age plumages. This up here is a younger bird where it's mostly all brown, and then they get a little spottier, and then like this bird up here looking a little silly is a full adult. So it is another fun bird that we get to see. They're quite charismatic, and they don't always travel alone, so sometimes you get a few of them. The other 2 booby species that we see a lot less occasionally are red-footed boobies and masked boobies. As I said, our red-footed boobies spent the night on the ship that I was on off of Florida a couple years ago, and we do see masked boobies often enough in the sort of central U.S., like say the Carolinas and northern Florida. We'll see them on those surveys, and also in the Gulf of Mexico. But it's always fun to see them in their different plumage stages. The one on top there is a juvenile bird, and the below one is an adult bird. So again, always a little different experience every time you see one. I'll end our seabirds here on some of our colder water ones that are a little more familiar here to the northeast waters. We can see a variety of species of alcids depending on the time of year. Up here on the left this is a common murre. And then we have a dovekey here, which on my most recent survey that I just got off of, dovekeys were by far the most common bird that we saw, oddly enough. And then I'm sure most folks are familiar here with puffins, which we see throughout the year. These are in better, nicer breeding plumage, but we'll see them in their winter or non-breeding plumage or as juveniles all the way off the coast, even as far down as the Carolinas. So not always the nice, pretty version that a lot of folks get to see, but still great to see puffins year-round. And then razorbills are another pretty common alcid for us out there, and they often travel in groups too, which makes it easier for an ID on them. A couple of the seabirds, not so much sea. I want to talk mostly about Toby, who is hopefully some folks will get this joke, cedar waxwing. It was a young bird that landed on a fall cruise I was on in 2021. If you're familiar with cedar waxwings, you know that they like to eat berries. And we noticed that he had landed, or she had landed on the ship and was trying to eat this little piece of red plastic that probably to them looked like a berry. And unfortunately, they weren't doing super great. You can see this sort of odd squat position on the deck. So the other seabird observer and I decided to help this little bird out. We've got some blueberries out of the salad bar and left them around the ship for Toby, which they thankfully found. So over the course of the next couple days, we watched this little waxwing eat as many blueberries as they could find, which made for some fun photos, as you can see here. It's hard not to anthropomorphize when you have interactions with a bird like this, but as you're watching them choke down every single blueberry, it's hard not to feel proud that you're possibly the reason that this bird is surviving. As I had mentioned earlier, a lot of birds don't make it on the ships, especially warblers, because they're often on protein diets like insects specifically. So not something that can be found necessarily on the ships. Sparrows can do okay because they'll eat suet and birdseed, but not so much the warblers. So finally, the chief steward had caught on to what we were doing with the blueberries and gave us sort of an older container of blueberries to just leave out. I love this photo because you can see the bird flying away with the blueberry in its beak. And then again, some other cool photos of it. It was just fun to sort of see all the different expressions of this one particular bird. And Toby was actually seen the last day before we pulled into port, which I think was day 4 of their time on the ship. So we like to think that this little waxwing made it to land that night, fueled by ship blueberries, and hopefully is still out there. A couple of quick videos here of some of the different bird species that you have seen around the ship. This here is a brown creeper, which probably thinks it was in a tree. This is a golden crowned kinglet, which you can see my camera there as it was moving around in the platform that we use for observing. You get to see these birds at a lot closer perspective because of the conditions. And there is a red-breasted nuthatch climbing the wire of some of the offside operations that we were doing. Wanted to just showcase some of the photos that I've seen along the way. So up here, starting with the top left, you have American redstarts, black Bernese warblers, black-throated blue warblers, northern water thrush, and then over here, Wilson's warbler. And then this was a fun experience. I got to see this northern parula hanging out with the male black-throated blue warbler on one of the ships off of Florida as it was migrating south. Cool to see those interspecies interactions. And then over here, this is a black pole warbler. More warblers. I'm pretty proud of my warbler list from the boat. We have a bay-breasted warbler up here, yellow-rumped warbler, which you might be familiar with if you're in Nantucket on the winter. Lots of them there. A yellow warbler here. Canada warbler, which was a new species for me last year. Very excited about that one. And then down here we have a Cape May warbler, Louisiana water thrush, and prairie warbler. Some of the other small birds, you have a red-eyed vireo here with a blue-headed vireo down below. You can probably see why this is called a golden crown kinglet. And then up here, this is a female purple finch, which was an awesome find for me. And then below, we have a house wren. This is my sparrow slide. So a variety of sparrow species seen on the boat. This is a savanna sparrow, and then you have a chipping sparrow. Snow bunting, which was one of my favorite birds to watch on the boat. We don't get to see them much because we don't usually sail in the winter time in New England, but this past year we had sort of a late winter cruise, so we were able to see snow buntings on the boat, which was awesome. We often see dark-eyed juncos. They're one of the more common bird species that we see in the fall, and as well as white-throated sparrows, which this one had gotten stuck in one of our labs, so I grabbed it to get it out. We also had this field sparrow and this Vesper sparrow on one of our cruises last year. These are all blackbird species that I've seen on the boat. You're probably familiar with common grackles and red-winged blackbirds, but this is a young Baltimore oriole. We also have seen brown-headed cowbirds out at sea. This is a rusty blackbird, which I know visits Nantucket on occasion. And two of my more exciting spottings are this yellow-headed blackbird that I saw off of Florida and this eastern meadowlark, which ended up on the ship. Two odd birds I did not expect to see out at sea. These are some more of the medium-sized birds. This is a mourning dove, a white-winged dove, which was a Gulf survey. And then we also had a northern mockingbird and great catbird. You're probably familiar with those. We had a dick sisal, which was one of the few times I've actually seen them out in flight like that. And then hermit thrush eating something on the deck here. A couple of the bigger birds, I just wanted to show these cute little videos. This one is of this poor great blue heron that's hanging out on the ship. It's hard to tell, but it's driving rain and it's very windy and it just did not look like it was having a good time. And this is a common eider, which was on one of the ships this past winter. A whole flock of them actually landed on the back, and I just wanted to show this little video of it trying to get out of the hallway. Not so comfortable on land with man-made obstructions, but adapt and overcome. You can see some of the deck folks on the back there trying to figure out what to do with this bird. Some of the other water-based birds we've seen: spotted sandpiper, cattle egret, great blue herons, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Black-legged kittiwake is one that we see quite a bit in the winter. That's probably our second most common bird on the survey I just got off of. This is a bridled tern. This was my lifer brown noddy, which was also a Gulf survey bird. You'll have to believe me that that's what it is. It's a terrible photo. And then least sandpiper, which is another, I know, common Nantucket migrant. I just love this photo. It doesn't look like much, but this is a spotted sandpiper that landed on the boat when we were about 100 miles offshore on the edge of the continental shelf. And again, try not to anthropomorphize, but it really feels like this bird was just kind of having one of those moments where, you know, you find yourself in a situation and you wonder what choices you've made in life to sort of bring you to where you are on that moment. And I think that little spotted sandpiper was having one of those moments, given that it was 100 miles out to sea and the best place to land was our boat. Some of the other boat landing species include raptors, which is great. So we've had, everyone is probably familiar with ospreys, one of the great comeback stories of DDT. We also have a number of peregrine falcons and merlins. I've only ever had one owl land on the boats that or at least I've seen. This is a saw-whet owl that landed on our boat last year. And this here was initially a misidentification on my part because it was my first cruise at sea, and I was not expecting to see the second East Coast record of Eurasian hobby, which is a small falcon from Eurasia, as the name implies. So that was probably the best bird I've ever seen at sea. It's going to be tough to beat. And because we were technically in Nantucket County waters, I actually have Eurasian hobby for my Nantucket County list. Along with raptors comes, unfortunately, some prey interactions. So it is a circle of life, especially out at sea. So this young peregrine falcon actually caught a spotted sandpiper in here. And then this merlin has what I called a hooded warbler. A little tough to see, but I actually have not seen hooded warbler from a boat except in this condition, which I don't count for my list. I did like to show this little mystery bird. I won't keep you guys guessing for too long, but I saw this one bird 30 miles out of the Outer Banks. I've never seen one flying like this from a ship before. And after much consultation with my other observer who was out there, who was as surprised as I was to see this, we determined that this is a pied-billed grebe, which is not a bird I've ever seen flying except in this situation. But you can kind of see its lobed feet here, and you can almost make out the sort of dark eye with the stripe through the bill. But odd to see it out in open water like that. I usually see them somewhere in a small pond or some sort of other freshwater body. Let's get into the marine mammals. This is my marine mammal list, as well as some friends. We've had some other interesting non-marine mammals come to our ship, which includes a couple moth species and, of course, monarch butterflies, especially when we're in the Gulf. I know it's kind of a confusing list with some of these dolphin names. Some of these are pretty rare dolphins that we see far offshore or in certain conditions. So some of them I had never even heard of until I started working at sea. So I'll just showcase a couple sides of the photos of them. I really enjoy seeing some of these species, especially blue whales are one of my favorites to see out there. And then I also really enjoy basking sharks, which I'll show. These are some of the more common dolphin species that we'll see. You'll notice pilot whales on this page here too. They are technically dolphins. They're part of the blackfish dolphins, which includes killer whales. They're just a very large dolphin species. And actually, fun fact, pilot whales, mostly short-finned, are one of the few non-primate mammal species in which females undergo menopause. And post-reproductive females actively contribute to their pod, which is something, again, not seen in non-primate mammal species. These are some of the more unusual dolphins. They're a little more habitat specific. Rhesus dolphins like deep, usually colder waters. Striped dolphins and spinner dolphins like warmer offshore waters. And clymenes are sort of in that same category, though clymenes are sort of an understudied because they were considered just a different color morph of spinner dolphins for a long time until they were determined to be their own species. I have seen a couple killer whales. One famous one named Old Tom. Some might be familiar with him. He's been seen off of Bay of Fundy before. He's been seen off of the Cape. Quite famous lone male that travels often with Atlantic white-sided dolphins. I like this photo because this is an example of common dolphins, which as the name implies, very common, but we sometimes see partially melanistic ones out there. And it's very interesting to see the color aberrations that come with marine mammals. The big whales, of course. Generally, my whale photos are pretty subpar because this is often the view that I get when I see them. It's important to remember I'm not working on a whale watching boat, though we do have permits to approach certain animals for IDs, which includes right whales, to make sure that we can add appropriate photos to the catalog. But I think while it doesn't make me a great photographer, it does make me a better observer by learning these animals' ID marks from a distance, and learning sort of the isms of being able to identify species. This whale, this humpback whale I had off of Long Island last summer, and you can see the propeller scars on this animal from an interaction with a boat at some point, though it looks like they're pretty well healed, which is great. Basking shark, I wanted to showcase basking sharks, the second largest species of shark in the world behind whale sharks. We often see them on our spring and summer cruises, June through August, and they seasonally spend more time closer to the surface and further inshore at those times, which is why we see more of them. They're really exciting because they have a propensity to breach. And as you can see in this photo here, one was doing so. It's thought that breaching helps them shed parasites that are attached to their bodies, like remoras or sea lampreys. And you can actually see one in this photo just hanging on here to the side of the basking shark. A couple of the other sea creatures I've managed to get photos of. Obviously our sea turtles here. Here's two green turtles making more green turtles. We do see leatherbacks and loggerheads, especially leatherbacks offshore. We see plenty of mola molas out there. And occasionally we do get to see some of the larger ray species, but a little more habitat specific. As I sort of come into the end here, one of the things that I would like to take away, if you have a second to contemplate, is the effect of balloons. I have seen every size, shape, and type of balloon at sea before. If you name it, I've seen it. 4th of July, graduation, happy birthday, engagement or wedding balloons, movie characters. I have seen so many Frozen and Paw Patrol balloons alone. And obviously, they cause a real threat to the environment. This one, I think, is a great example of how it could look like a jellyfish to a leatherback turtle who would ingest it or get entangled in it. So, in short, please consider other gifts to celebrate occasions with for your friends and family. It's really the right choice when it comes to environmental considerations. So lastly, I'm just going to cover a couple projects I've worked on and what to do for your first or any project trip. I've been, again, a part of a lot of different projects. There's sort of a running joke that NOAA actually stands for the National Organization for the Advancement of Acronyms, and you can probably see why here. The cruises are for different purposes. Some of them, like AMAPs and GOMAPs, are specifically for marine mammal surveys, and I often, again, serve as a birder on those. And then some of the other ones are more oceanographic, and they are cruises that really get to the bottom and take in more oceanographic data, and I'll talk briefly about that, but I just wanted to showcase sort of our setup on the flying bridge. Here, you can see me with my binoculars and our equipment that we use to collect data. But then you have a cruise like this, where this is a marine mammal specific cruise, and they use mounted high power binoculars to identify marine mammals at a greater distance. I wish we had conditions like this all the time. That's not necessarily the case, but obviously this is a summer cruise versus more of a winter, colder cruise. This is an example of some of the track lines that we've done. I sailed on all of these cruises in 2021, and it just showcases the amount of distance that we covered for various surveys collecting oceanographic data, such as plankton sampling or marine mammal data. So there are a couple of different cruises represented here, those 3 in the different seasons. And when I'm at sea, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great scientists. It is a pleasure when I particularly get to sail with other scientific females. And this photo is one that we took back in 2021, where we were with about 28 other crew members that were all male, and us 4 female scientists were the only females on the boat. While that's not the norm, it does happen a few times, and so it's just great to have that sort of camaraderie in a difficult field like this. This is a big oceanographic cruise series, both Spiroba and Nicoa, that I got to sail on. They send this big machine down. We call it a CTD for conductivity, temperature, and depth. Basically, it collects water samples at different depths and measures a number of parameters: salinity, temperature, pH, chlorophyll. We also had this, it's called a REMIS, again, more acronyms, a Remote Environmental Monitoring Unit, which is sort of an autonomous underwater vehicle that Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution was using in this particular cruise. So we send this particular instrument down to depths all the way to the ocean floor. So we're talking up to maybe 6,000 meters, which can take hours. And the ships have to be able to hold position to collect water at those specific times for that length of time. And it can be a little tedious, but so interesting, the sort of information that's collected. They tend to be bigger cruises too. We get up to 30 different scientists that sail at the same time. So it's a big group of people doing all sorts of different projects. Here I'm telling these oceanographers about boobies, and that, yes, they are a real bird and what they are out at sea. So it's fun learning different science and being able to educate other people on the types of things that I work on. And this was that cruise I was talking about, where I got to see my life a red-footed booby on this South Florida section that we got to do. We did this cruise in 2022, where we covered a lot of offshore areas. These are those deep ones I was talking about, where we went to about 6,000 meters. This is also the cruise that I saw Old Tom up here in the Bay of Fundy in. And this was just a really fun cruise for me personally because I got to see so much of the East Coast. And throughout, we did this over the course of August and September. So it was just a lot of time spent at sea and covering a lot of distance. So as promised, a few tips and tricks for those who are going on a pelagic. This is probably familiar information for those who have been out before, but for those that are looking to take their first trip out in the open ocean, here's a few things to keep in mind. First, you don't need to be a hero. Take the meds. Find what's right for you, either Dramamine or Bonine. Bonine tends to be a non-drowsy seasickness drug. I think the common name is meclizine for it. And it's also called non-drowsy Dramamine. That works a lot better for me in rough conditions because Dramamine makes me very sleepy and almost too sleepy to function out at sea. Which again, getting a good night's sleep and being prepared when you're out there can really help your senses. And eating it goes along with that. You don't want to be too full of food or too empty of food. If you're going out on a trip for a whole day, try to snack along the way and not totally binge or have an empty stomach because there is a motion for everybody that can make you sick, and sort of trying to keep a nice even balance will help with those conditions. Yes, focusing on the horizon when you feel sick is helpful. I find it easier to just be out in fresh air and talk to someone and sort of distract yourself rather than sit inside where you can't your body can't necessarily understand what's happening, and it can make you more seasick. And I also specifically would like to remind people that when you go on a whale watching trip or something like that, the captain cannot control the weather or what they see as much as they wish they could. So, be kind to those that are out there driving the boats and trying to help you when we're either on a birding trip or something like that. It's helpful if you know what species that you might see and be able to maybe memorize a few ID points to help yourself identify what you see out there and enjoy it. There's just so much to be found in our oceans, and it's a privilege to see all these birds and marine mammals out there. And it can be a real bonding experience with the folks that you go out with. So I highly recommend a pelagic trip if you haven't taken one yet. But there can be some hiccups for those that get seasick. So being prepared and knowing what you're getting yourself into can really make the experience that much better. So with that, I'll take any questions you have for me.
Thank you, Allison, so much. I'm like clapping. It's like the hard part about webinars is you don't get the full applause, but I feel like I learned so much. I'm gonna ask a few questions, but I just want to let everyone know now you can put questions in the chat, and I'll read them out loud to Allison so that they're recorded. We have a few questions in the Q&A, yeah, so let's get to it. I have a quick question just because you ended on the pelagic trips. I personally get seasick really easily, and I remember going on a whale watching trip, and it was actually using the binoculars while the boat's moving was actually kind of amplified it. So I'm really curious about you guys that are like that. Your job is to look through optics while you're out at sea. Was that hard to get used to when you first started doing this?
Yeah, it definitely helps that we are on bigger vessels. The smallest ones that I've sailed on have been at least 70 feet. And even those you can really feel the waves in them. So there is a point where the sea conditions, as I mentioned, are too difficult for work, and that usually is when you can't use the mounted big eyes for those marine mammal cruises because will be physically holding on to them as the boat is pitching, and it's basically impossible. But I try to balance using my binoculars with trying to keep a steady eye because it definitely can get in your head and get you psych yourself out about what's actually moving, whether you're looking through them or not. But it is a transition period too. Having spent as much time as I do, I sail about a third of the year. So usually between 100 and 120 days. And spending time at sea definitely helps take the edge off.
All right, thanks. I'm going to get to some questions. So Scott Wilson may have missed the very beginning, but he asked, what was your major in college and how and when did you become a birder?
Yeah, so I majored in zoo and wildlife biology. Actually, was I wanted to be a zookeeper and was a zookeeper for a couple years until I actually dislocated my shoulder on the job and had to get surgery. And that was a couple years after I had graduated and I had taken an ornithology course my senior year of undergrad and had really gotten into birds at the time, but was still sort of figuring out what a career in birds or birding meant. So while I had my surgery and was laid up for a bit, I sort of explored other options and actually applied for that job on Tuckernuck, and that sort of was the catalyst for all things bird going forward.
Nice. That's a good place to get a start like that, right?
Yeah, I'm a little biased, but definitely a great place.
All right, Ken asked, so Ken saw a piping plover at Skinner's Golf Course in Sconset last week. And do you think that's a rarity for this time of year?
It's definitely unusual. Obviously the birds are not super rare in the summertime if you're in the right habitat, but it is definitely unusual. I know the Nantucket Christmas Bird Count has had piping plover in the past, maybe only a handful of years, but yeah, that's an unusual sighting. I think as we're seeing more of the effects of climate change and having weird winters, I think that will become more of a norm, but yeah, I'd call that an odd one.
Yeah, and I just want to make a plug for like if you see odd things, either recording it an iNaturalist if you can, or creating an eBird list or something like that. Like data are always
Documented,
good.
yes.
Keep that data. Okay, what sighting of either mammal or bird got you the most excited?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, I think in person at the time, the first time I ever saw a blue whale, which was a couple summers ago, was probably the most exciting. Just because everyone on the boat is excited about it, even people who are, working in the engine room or things like that. But everything stops on the boat, everybody comes out. They're just, it's hard to describe how large they are. And we're on big vessels and we're really high up, but they're just incredible. And it's not something I've only seen probably 3 or 4 of them in my now going on 6 years of doing this work. So it's not something we see all the time. So every time, we try to stop and take advantage of that and get photos and really just appreciate that we happen to run into one.
We do have a few more questions, but I have a logistics question for collecting the data. So if you're observing birds and you're kind of going from binoculars and observing and then recording the data, are you yelling out data and recording it, or are you writing it, or someone else transcribing? I'm just thinking of the
Yeah.
practicality of collecting that data.
Yep. Yeah. So for the most part, if we're doing naked eye surveys, so we do a strip transect methodology. So for our naked eye surveys, we're only observing the most immediate 300 meters in the boat. That is how the math has worked out for greatest detectability. So almost all of my surveys for that are naked eye detection and then binocular species confirmation. So
Okay.
for the most part, it's naked eye, and then we have a key-driven data platform now where I can hit probably 5 keys and collect at least the basic data about it, what species it is by the species code, location,
Yeah.
and direction of travel, or whatever the basic behavior is. And then the marine mammal observers have a designated data collection person, and they either radio or if they have the person, depending on the weather, out on the deck with them, their sole job is to just record data while the marine mammal observers are in the big eyes.
Great. See, thanks. As a plant ecologist, I'm used to them they just stay where they
They stay
have
there.
time. And you're they're rushing by. You gotta get it. All right. So Ken Blackshot asked, are you concerned about funding for this sort of research continuing?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern of mine, something that we've all talked about recently. Some of our surveys are funded by the Navy. Actually, they're one of the main funders because they need to know where marine mammals are for different exercises and because they have so many vessels in the area, and vessel strikes are obviously a huge concern for our large whales. It is something that I am keeping a close eye on and considering, other careers that align closely, such as PSO work. My job on the NOAA ships is not considered PSO, protected species observing, because it's not mitigation work. It's more, like I said, abundance and distribution surveys. So while they're closely related, I think I may find myself having to do more PSO work to make up for the lack of sea time from funding.
So we have a few more questions. Allison, are you okay kind of
Absolutely.
staying on for a minute for people
I know
questions?
I
Okay.
was a little chatty on my
No,
presentation.
no,
I'm
that's
happy to
great.
answer.
I just want to, as people might be needing to get off, that's fine. We are recording, like I said, so you'll be getting the recording tomorrow. I just want to be able to go through the rest of the questions,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind. So Ken asked, about the Gulf Stream, and have you noticed on the your different trips, the change as the Gulf Stream is either changing in temperature or the path it takes in direction? I know we've heard a lot about changes, and I'm curious if you've seen anything.
So it's a little difficult for me to say personally, just because probably half the surveys I do don't go that far, because if I'm
Okay.
contracting for Northeast fisheries, it really stops at the Carolinas. We do see, so one of the cruises that I was on, that Spiropa cruise, was specifically a shelf break productivity cruise. So we spent almost the entire cruise just surveying back and forth over the edge of the continental shelf, which included dipping into the Gulf Stream and coming back. And then anytime there were those, what they call eddies, which are these like off bursts of the Gulf Stream, which kind of create these like little circular currents, we would spend some time trying to sample in them and sampling at that location while those eddies were there and collecting the oceanographic data, and then wait for them to pass through and then try to get back in that same spot and just see some of those differences and how the plankton life or other more like chemistry is affected by the Gulf Stream having more of those outbursts. And I know with some of the effects of climate change, it can make the Gulf Stream do some funky things and have more of these weird eddy outbursts. And while it's sort of outside of my general scope of knowledge, it was fun to see these other people studying these things that may not even have been known to science in their lifetime.
It's amazing. I mean, I feel like all the research that's going on offshore is so important, and we just obviously don't see it every day. So I really appreciate you bringing a lot of it to us. RJ, classic RJ, how old do we think Old Tom is?
Oh, that's a great question. I can't remember. I remember looking it up at the time. At least 20. I want to say probably in their 30s, in his 30s. He's a well-known character, and he's been documented. There's a Bay of Fundy sort of observers group, and they keep track of his sightings because it's an area that he frequents a lot. And there are posts going back, I believe, to like right about when Facebook was kind of started. So I know that that's at least the mid 2000s, but I do think that he's been recorded for even longer than that. I can't remember off the top of my head though.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Allison. We have a lot of people saying thank you for a great presentation. It's always nice to have everyone that stayed for the end of the questions. I want to thank Allison again for being here tonight and remind everyone that's still on. We do have more Science Pub presentations coming up now through May. And once again, our next one is February 10th, but you can see all the different Science Pubs that you can register for on the Linda Loring Nature Foundation website and in our calendar. Our bird trips, if you're excited about birding, now that you've seen some of Allison's photos, our nature rambles once a month. So we still have a lot going on this winter. There's still tons of birds to look at. So thanks again, Allison.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was so much fun.
All right.